keep you too long. I don't want to go overtime. People have their schedules. And I'll probably go overtime anyway, but I don't want to go into double overtime. I'll start now. And okay, the Purim Meshulash. I'm taking advantage. I'm not going to be here next week, or I don't know if there is on Tanit Esther. But the next time I'll be here is in the week after Purim, and I'll Bezrat Hashem. I'm here for three sessions then. So I'll try to do a deep dive in Hilchot Pesach, getting up there. And one of those topics, I'll give a spoiler alert as to one of those topics, is really a continuation of this year, in the sense that, as I just overheard a conversation here, the next Purim Meshulash will be in 20 years' time, Bezrat Hashem. If we keep, unless of course the Sanhedrin reconvenes and begins to determine it in real time and not based on the calendar. So we should all be Zocha Bezrat Hashem in 20 years to review the notes and what to do.
To remind us of the
and okay, there's a date. We have a date. Bezrat Hashem will be here. Now, while that makes it sound as though Purim Meshulash is this really rare event, it's not quite as rare as we might think. In other words, it actually happens 11.5% of the time. Okay, in other words, 11. So it's not as there are. I think there's certain days, I forget which one, can happen about 20% of the time. This 11 says it's not incredibly rare, but because of the vagaries of the calendar, and we'll mention one of them in a few minutes, because of the vagaries of the calendar, so it's which makes the calendar all that much more complex, is that there are days that in order to prevent the certain dates falling on certain days, so there's all sorts of coordination that goes into the calendar to avoid that. So, for example, one of the things which we're going to see just in 1 minute, the Purim can never fall out on Shabbat in our calendar. And the Purim itself, the 14th of Adar, never falls out on Shabbat, because if it did, so then Yom Kippur always would fall out on that day, would fall out on a Friday. And one of the rules of the calendar is Lo Adu B'Rosh, right? That Rosh Hashanah never falls out on a Sunday, the Aleph, or on a Wednesday, the Daled, or on a Friday. Right? And because if it fell out on either a Wednesday or a Friday, so then we'll leave Sunday aside for the moment, then Yom Kippur would fall out on either Friday or Sunday. And we can't have a situation where you're going to have 2 consecutive days, where no melacha whatsoever can be done. In other words, for us, it would be, and maybe, if they were to redo the calendar, maybe you could do it. It would be a minor, I wouldn't say minor, it would be an inconvenience. Because with, electricity and timers and the like, we could manage. But back in the day, right, where you don't have electricity, you don't have refrigeration, you can't start a fire, right? So to do that for 48 consecutive hours means that it's going to be very difficult just to live. Very uncomfortable. So when they were making the calendar, they made sure that Yom Kippur could never fall out 2 days, either the day before or after Shabbat. So as a result, Purim can't fall out on Friday, on Shabbat, excuse me, because if Purim falls out on Shabbat, so then Yom Kippur would fall out on a Friday without getting into all the calculations, because I'm not allowed to go into double overtime. So that is that's something to keep in mind. But in terms of the actual Purim Meshulash, so it happens, it does fall out. That's why the last time we had it was, I think, 4 years ago. So sometimes you can have it within 3-4 years of one another. Other times it's 14 years. There's a whole calendar calendar that's worked out. But you can, if you're interested, you can look in the Wikipedia page. It's all there. So this is getting to what I mentioned before in terms of the continuation this year. So whenever Purim falls out on Friday, and we have this Purim Meshulash situation here in Yerushalayim and in other walled cities, for those of you who are planning on traveling to Shushan, that will always bring up two other halachic oddities, and that is the one coming up, which is Erev Pesach will always fall out on Shabbat when you have a Purim Meshulash. Okay, in terms of Seter. And the third is that Tisha B'Av will be on a Sunday. Okay, so it's not a nidcha. It's the first day of Pesach and Tisha B'Av, Atbash, etc. is always the first day of Pesach is always the same day as Tisha B'Av. Also, getting back to that, so in that same acrostic, right, the Aleph, the first day of Pesach is Tisha B'Av, the second day is Shavuot, etc. The Vav, the sixth day of Pesach, is always the Purim before. Okay, so if you're curious as to which day of the week the sixth day of Pesach will be, it's Friday. Okay, so that's so those all create different halachic conundrums and discussions. All three. So V'li Neder, one of the shiurim next month will discuss the issues of Erev Pesach Shechal Liot b'Shabbat. But let's get to Purim Meshulash. So now so we have this situation. You have Purim, and we could take a look at the second source here, the Mishnah. The Mishnah, just a snippet of the very first Mishnah, the first two Mishnayot of Masechet Megillah. And the Masechet Megillah begins with a discussion of the different days that Purim can fall out on, and the Mishnah is pre-calendar. It's when the Rosh Chodesh and the years were determined by the Beit Din and the witnesses coming, etc. So in the Mishnah, the possibility of there being a Purim on Shabbat itself is a possibility. So the Mishnah, I'm taking it, this is the Mishnah is in progress here, where we're picking it up. Chal liyot b'chamishi. If Purim falls out on a Thursday, so then kfarim v'ayarot gdolot korin bo biyom umukafot choma lemachar. So then the villages and the towns, the larger towns, read it on Thursday itself, read the Megillah, umukafot choma, and the walled cities read it the following day on Friday. Okay, the villages that are being referred to as being important here is that at the time of the Mishnah, and earlier, but was already discontinued in the time of the Gemara, the basically metropolitan areas, small villages that were near major towns, where you had the market day was on Monday and Thursday, so they would read the Megillah on the market day. They would read it on Monday, Thursday, and even if it was earlier. So if Purim falls out on a market day on Thursday, so then the villages read it on Thursday itself. Continuation, really more important for us here. Chal liyot Erev Shabbat. If Purim falls out on Erev Shabbat, as it does this year, so then Kfarim makdimim liyom haknisa. So then the villages would read the Megillah the day before on Thursday. V'ayarot gdolot umukafot choma korin bo b'yom. And then the towns, basically every place not a walled city, major cities, umakafot choma, and the walled cities as well, read it on the day of Purim itself, meaning on the 14th. Even though normally the walled cities would read it on the 15th, so the Mishnah says that in our situation, or it's Purim Meshulash, which the Mishnah doesn't know of yet, so that is so it's already well-grounded, very early source, that everyone reads the Megillah on Friday. Okay? With the exception of the Kfarim, but as I said, that custom was discontinued shortly after the time of the Mishnah. Chaliyot b'Shabbat. What happens if Purim falls out on Shabbat? Because again, in our calendar, it's impossible. But at the time of the Mishnah, it was a possibility. And then, if they had lots of wiggle room to make sure that Yom Kippur wouldn't fall out on a Sunday or Friday, because we don't have any wiggle room. Right? The only movement in our calendar, there are two, is either on a leap year where things get where you throw in that extra month, or when Cheshvan and Kislev can either be 29 or 30 days. So there you get a little wiggle room. But the rest of the time, it's standard. Shvat is always a 30-day month. Adar is always a 29-day month. Nisan is always a 30-day month. Iyar is always 29, etc. In other words, all of these months are set. So if Purim is on Shabbat, Yom Kippur is going to be on Sunday. There's no way around it. But at the time of the Mishnah, you could change things in the middle. So then, if it were to happen on Shabbat, so what happens? Kfarim v'ayarok dolot makdimim v'korin liyom haknisa. So then, if everyone other than the walled cities would read it on Thursday, right? There's a bit of a discussion in the Gemara whether it should be Thursday or Friday. Not our problem. Umukafot choma, but the walled cities read it on Sunday. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Now, in the Tanaitic literature, now that's the discussion that we have. There's a mention of how to read, that we don't read. The Mishnah doesn't explain why we don't read the Megillah on Shabbat. But it's very clear from the Mishnah that we don't read the Megillah on Shabbat. The Mishnah doesn't talk about the other mitzvot of Purim. What about Mishloach Manot? What about the Seudah? What about Matanot Le'Evyonim? These are not mentioned. Okay, so fine. So then so we continue in our reading. So if we look now at the, let's look at the first source. Okay, the first source is actually a later source, but I put it here first in order to sort of give us a sense of, well, what has Purim Meshulash become in terms of the mitzvot, and if that's at least from the Shulchan Aruch, that we'll see that not everything the Shulchan Aruch says is necessarily agreed upon by everybody, and then we'll see where things come from. So the Shulchan Aruch says the following: Yom Chamisha Asar, the first source, Shechal Liyot b'Shabbat. If the 15th falls out on Shabbat, Ein Korina Megillah b'Shabbat. So we can't read the Megillah on Shabbat. Al Makdimim L'Kroto be'erev Shabbat. We read it beforehand. V'govim ma'ot matnot le'evyonim u'mechalkim otam bo b'yom. So matanot le'evyonim is also performed on Friday. Okay, the mitzvah matanot le'evyonim goes there. Uviyom. So we have to ask why. You understand it can't be on Shabbat. So you could say, okay, since you can't give money on Shabbat, so you give it on Friday. Okay, that sounds reasonable, but let's continue. Uviyom Shabbat motzim shnei svarim. So on the Shabbat, you take out two svarim, two Sifrei Torah. Uvisheni korin vayavo Amalek. In other words, basically what this v'omrim al anisim. Right, so now, here in Yerushalayim, for the real Purim remains Shabbat. We can't read the Megillah for a reason still not explained, but it doesn't stop it from being Purim. So when are you going to say Al Hanisim? On Shabbat. When are you going to have a special Kriyat Torah for Purim, the way that we normally do? On Shabbat. So the way, because it's Shabbat, so we still have the Parshat HaShavua. We'll have the maftir being Vayavo Amalek. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention the Haftorah. There is, unfortunately or fortunately, there's only one segment in the Navi that discusses Amalek, or the theme of Purim, and that's the same Haftarah that we're going to be reading for Parshat Zachor, the story of Shaul and Agag and Shmuel, etc., of that battle with Amalek. So that's going to be the Haftarah. This is another rare instance where, when do you read the same Haftarah 2 weeks in a row? Okay, so we'll read it here in Yerushalayim, Parshat Zachor, and following on Purim. But everywhere else, by the way, not those people who are the Ephraimians, okay, amongst us. So we will read the regular Haftorah of Parshat Kitisa. Okay, there's there will be absolutely nothing of Purim mentioned outside of the walled cities. Okay, and that's what? And one Sefer Torah. It's a regular Shabbat. Okay, Purim's over. Okay, hopefully we'll get to one little change where maybe Purim isn't over. Get to it in a second. Now that would be great if that's what everything was done. But there's another. Ve'eno sin Sudat Purim ad Yom Echad b'Shabbat. Sudat Purim, that happens on Sunday, right? Now there's no Al Nisib. It's after Purim, right? But you get the Su'uda in on Sunday, and that's the term for Purim Meshulash. It's a 3-day Purim, right? Friday we have Kriyat Megillah, we have Matanot Le'Evyonim. Shabbat we have Al Hanisim and the Kriyat Torah. On Sunday you have the meal. Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention Mishloach Manot. When is Mishloach Manot?
Or dressing up.
Okay, or dressing up. Well, I was going to say, but some people, dress up as rabbis every Shabbat of the week. But okay, the point is that of the year. Okay, that's Seder, so you can do that. What?
When do you drink?
When do you drink? Okay, so we'll get to the Machmirim there. Anyway, the point though is that this is the broad outline, and now let's try to figure out a little bit more how we got there. And I want to get also into some particular issues even more in depth than that. So we now look at we'll skip the third source for the moment. We'll go to number 4. So it's the Gemara on that Mishnah. So the Gemara says the following: the Kulei Alma Mia Megillah b'Shabbat lo Karina. Everyone agrees that you cannot read the Megillah on Shabbat. My Tama, why not? Well, we said you're reading the Sefer Torah, right? Why can't you read the Megillah? So the Amar Rabbah. So Rabbah says the following idea. Now Rabbah is already the 3rd generation of Tanaim. Of Amoraim, excuse me. Okay, in other words, Rabbah is, relatively speaking, we're talking about the 4th century now. So this is a relatively late source. So the Hakol Chayavin b'Kriyat Megillah, Ve'ein, I will skip the parentheses for a moment, or the rounded brackets for the British. Ve'ein Hakol b'Kiyin b'Mikra Megillah. Right, so everyone has the Chiyuv, but not everyone knows how to read the Megillah. Gzeira Shema yitlana biyado v'yelech etzel bakil ilmod v'yavirena arba amot b'shut harabim. So we have our concern is that someone is going to take his Megillah and go to the Baal Koreh with the Megillah and carry the Megillah in Reshut harabim. Okay, this is, and the Gemara behind Tama, and this is Rabbah says is the rationale for dishofar, v'hainu tama dilulav. Right? This is also why when Rosh Hashanah falls out on Shabbat, or the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbat, and that happens the same year, right? Always the same time, because exactly 2 weeks later. So then we do not have the Tkiyat Shofar, and then we do not have the Nitilat Lulav. The only places that we would have it is in the Mikdash or the Sanhedrin, etc. But basically, and that's another discussion for the next time that happens, Bezrat Hashem. But it's the same rationale. We're just concerned that people are going to carry the instrument of the mitzvah, and that will lead to the desecration of the Shabbat. Now, if that's the reason, and this is one of the more, head-scratching types of gzerah. Really, how concerned are we about this? Well, etc. And you have to compare it to things like we don't do Brit Milah, for example, on Shabbat. Well, maybe the Moel is going to carry the knife, or I'm going to bring the knife to the Moel. Why aren't we concerned about that? Why are we concerned someone's going to bring a Sefer Torah to the shul for Kriyat Torah? So there are answers that are given, but the basic idea here, and this is something to think about, at least according to Rabbah, that here the rationale, if you will, is it's a public policy concern. In other words, you're basically saying the following. Statistically, Rabbah's right. In other words, there will be people at some point throughout Jewish history who will have carried in order to do this. Right? What is your, the risk-benefit ratio here? In other words, basically what you're saying is, I understand, you say, I'm not going to carry, go around the room. Who's going to carry? Probably no one in this room would carry. But statistically, there will be some people, perhaps every year, who will carry. Right? And so is that Chilul Shabbat that will happen, right? We don't know who will do it, or when it will be done, is that worth the mitzvah or not? In other words, that's really his calculation. And what he's saying is that we value Shabbat so much that we don't want to again, not to minimize the risk, but it's minimizing or eliminating the certain possibility that it will happen. Right? Somewhere. What? So at a certain point you say, okay, there's an Eruv now, and we don't have that concern, so should the Gezerah be changed? Okay, there is that discussion, by the way, and it's more of a discussion with regard to other areas, but I don't want to get into it. It's just an aside here. This is the idea that Rabbah says. Here, Rabbi Yosef, just one second, let's finish the Gemara. Rabbi Yosef, who is Rabbah's Bar Plukta, is his foil in general, he has a different answer. So he says, I should have put put the bold in, I'm sorry. Rabbi Yosef Amar, so it's the middle of the third line, Amar mipnei she'einehen shel aniyim nisuot b'mikra Megillah. So it's nothing to do with carrying, but rather it's because aniyim come to the Megillah reading knowing that they're going to get a handout. It's matanat le'evyonim. And you can't give them tzedakah on Shabbat. And so here Rabbi Yosef is basically saying, so give it some other time. So Rabbi Yosef seems to be saying, you can't. If it's Purim, so then you have to give them the tzedakah when it's Purim. So how do I define it? By when the aniyim are going to come. They're going to come to shul for Kriyat Megillah. The rest of the time, you have to find the ani. When it comes to Kriyat Megillah, the aniyim find you. You're in shul. You're the target, right? So they are there at that point. If you wait for some other time, there are going to be aniyim who do not get their matanot le'evyonim. So because it's a social welfare takana, it's better to push Megillah away so that all the aniyim, or the maximum number of aniyim, are going to get their matanot le'evyonim on Purim. That's Rav Yosef's way of understanding it. And we're going to see, hopefully, that it's not only a question of the rationale. Now, Tosa, there are some Rishonim who say that Rav Yosef agrees with Rabbah. After all, he has to explain shofar, he has to explain lulav, and it's just that he's adding here onto Purim because under certain circumstances, certain places, Rabba's takana doesn't apply specifically in the mikdash. It doesn't apply. So Rav Yosef wants it to be blanket. That's why he adds this. But you don't have to say that. You can say that Rav Yosef is saying no. At least with regard to Megillah, our concern isn't that someone's going to carry the Megillah, right? Our concern is, and if you, I don't want to, it'll take me too far afield to say why Megillah is perhaps the least of the concerns of the three, but it's not because we're concerned about carrying the Megillah, it's because we are concerned about the Aniyim. Yeah.
Is that the rationale for, like this year, when Megillah reading will be everywhere on Friday, so gifts to the poor are all...
Correct. So that is now, based on this, we can understand why Matanot LeEvyonim becomes hooked to Kriyat Megillah. We said we have the Purim Meshulash, we have the Kriyat Megillah. So if you're going to have the Seudah on Sunday, why don't you have Matanot LeEvyonim on Sunday as well? So the answer is because of what Rav Yosef's concerned. Now, Rabbah doesn't necessarily disagree with Rav Yosef that it's important to have the Matanot LeEvyonim together with the Kriyat Megillah. He just never reaches that point because he's just saying, okay, would we move Kriyat Megillah for Matanot LeEvyonim? Rav Yosef says yes. Rabbah, it's a moot question because we're already moving the Kriyat Megillah because we're concerned about Shabbat. So okay, we've moved it, and now give your Matanot LeEvyonim. I agree with you in principle in terms of the importance and the connection between the two, but would Matanot LeEvyonim be so important that we would move the Kriyat Megillah because of Matanot LeEvyonim? So Rabbah says, I don't know. I don't have to. I have this problem. I have this other takana. But Rabbi Yosef says, yes, it is important enough that we are even willing to change the date of the Megillah.
With the original Mishnah, we were moving it all the time. The fall between 11 and 15, affecting market day, when people are going to come in and are going to hear it.
Right.
Now, why is that an issue for Megillah only? What do they do during Shabbos in these places?
Okay.
How are they waiting there?
Excellent question. It'll take me into triple overtime. Okay, so we'll hold up to another time. But you're right that it is a very interesting takana that they made for the Megillah, for all of these townspeople, these village people to go to on different dates. But it's not for us to discuss right now. So that's with regard to Matanot LeEvyonim, and that's why Matanot LeEvyonim is moved to Friday. We're going to come back to this source in a few minutes to understand things a little bit more in depth. But right now, I just want to cover all of the halachot. What about the din of the Seudah? How does the Seudah get to be on Sunday? Right? That's just that's weird. Okay, it's because it's Tet Zayin. It's not Purim at all. So it's already based in the Yerushalmi, actually. The Yerushalmi here, number 6, says the following: Be'elu amru makdimim v'lo ma'achrin. So these are the halachot that we say that we move things up instead of making them later. So, for example, when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbat, we know that you make Tisha B'Av later. Here, Purim, we're pushing it up. We don't say, okay, read the Megillah on the 16th. So, Kriyat Megillah, Trumat Shkalim Makdimim V'lo Ma'achrin. So, the reading of the Megillah and the giving of the Shkalim, so you do it earlier rather than later. Sudat Rosh Chodesh, Usudat Purim, Ma'achrin V'lo Makdimim. But when it comes to the Su'udah, especially there was a minhag in the time of the Yerushalmi to have a special meal on Rosh Chodesh, and the halacha of Sudat Purim that we have as well. So that you don't do on Shabbat, you do it on the Sunday. So Rabbi Zera, boy, kumi Rabbi Avo. So Rabbi Zera asked this question to Rabbi Avohu. Rabbi Zera, by the way, originally he was a Babylonian who made Aliyah. So it's interesting that he's asking the question because basically he's saying, I don't know how many places in Bavel did this because it's not based in, it's not clear that, I don't know, if there were any cities where they would read on the 15th in Babel. But be that as it may, here he is in Eretz Yisrael, and he's asking the question, V'yasu otam b'Shabbat. Why don't you just have the meal on Shabbat? What's the big deal? You're having a meal anyway, so call it Shabbat meal and Sudat Purim. Right? A much later custom, but was prevalent for centuries, when the people would get married on Friday afternoons. The reason to get married on Friday afternoon is that you can make the wedding feast on Friday night, and then it would be basically you're mixing the two together, and especially since it was also customary to invite the poor people to the wedding feasts, so it's another opportunity for tzedakah, etc. So that was the standard custom, and there are all sorts of shilas that are asked. When people are getting into arguments about the Tanaim, and so can you do the kiddushin on Friday night, because the negotiations dragged on into Friday night? Can you do the kiddushin on Friday night, or do you have to push off the wedding till Sunday? Right, so the Achronim was paskin, do it on Friday night, because you don't know if the whole deal is going to fall apart. Do it now, Friday night, have the kiddushin, have the wedding, etc. So you can double up. So what's the problem? So the answer here, Amar le, la'asot otam yemei mishteh v'simcha. So why do we have the meal in the first place? It's because of the pasuk in the Megillah. The pasuk says in the ninth parak that we are going to make these days of feasting and joy. Et shesimchato tluya bebeit din, yatsa zeh shesimchato tluya b'dei shamayim. Here, the answer Rabbi Avo gives Rabbi Zera is that the Purim Suda has to have its own unique characteristics. This was given from Beit Din. This was part of the takana of Purim. And if you have it on Shabbat, where the mitzvah of eating on Shabbat is already part of Shabbat, so then you are diluting the importance of the Sudat Purim. Sudat Purim has to stand alone, and therefore it goes to Sunday. Doesn't ask, well, why don't you do it on Friday? Okay?
Shabbos is not the day of Simcha.
Okay, so you could get into the question of Simcha. That's a shirin of itself. It's Shabbat a day of Simcha or not, right? Yisbuchu v'malchutcha shomrei Shabbat. So, okay, but the Yerushalmi seems to be saying that the meal on Shabbat is part of Simchat Shabbat, if you want to call it that. So that's the Yerushalmi. Fast forward 1,100 years. Okay? And we are now in the 16th century, maybe 1,200 years even, 16th century in Yerushalayim. And the Rav Levi Ibn Chaviv, the Ralbach, who is has a fascinating history himself. He's born in Spain. The family moved to Portugal. He was forcibly converted. He gets his way to Salonika in Greece, and then from there he gets to Yerushalayim. He becomes the Rav Rashi of Yerushalayim. At that time, this is the same time that the Beit Yosef is in Tzfat. So he's the same, and the Rebbe of the Beit Yosef, of Yaakov Beirav, they're most famous for the controversy as to whether you can reestablish smicha or not. So in Tzfat they wanted to reestablish smicha, and the Rabbi Yosef Karo was one of the people that Rabbi Yaakov Beirav gave smicha to, and the Ralbach was the staunch opponent of the idea. Right? It was Yerushalayim versus Tzfat in this regard, and ultimately Yerushalayim won. So the Ralbach is a very important figure, even though he's somewhat at this point obscure. And he talks about the following. In one of his tshuvot, he says, "Bidun hasuuda yesh safek." Right? He has a whole. Basically, this tshuva goes, is what I'm doing now. He goes down the list of the different halachot of what you're going to do on Purim Meshulash. He says, now with regard to the su'udah, there is a safek. Ki kefi shanira me Yerushalmi. If you read the Yerushalmi, ma'achrim oto liyom rishon. You push it to Sunday. V'chein she'aviru ha'rif zal nira dera'ui la'asot ken. And the Rif brings this Yerushalmi, and so that's the psak of the Rif. Right, and then he brings other sources. But then to the, but he says, and he said, now I came to Yerushalayim, and I see that's what the minhag of Yerushalayim is, right? He's a newcomer to Yerushalayim. He's becoming the Rav of Yerushalayim, but he is still a newcomer, and there are minhagim of the makom, and we all know what happens when a new rabbi comes to town and there are minhagim, the makom. So, okay, he said this is what people have been doing for how many centuries? I don't know. But this is what people are doing. They're following the Yerushalmi. Remember, there was a break in terms of Jewish settlement during the Crusades that the Crusaders massacred several thousand Jews when they came to Yerushalayim. Ha'emet shahadavar hazeh kashem ma'od. Right, so the bold print. So he says, but I really have a big problem. I know it's a Yerushalmi, but I don't understand it. L'seicha l'kablo. It just logically, it blows the mind. Shekevan shechiyuv asudah b'Purim anu lomdim mima shekatuv simcha umishteh. Right, so where do we get this meal in the first place? Is because of the pasuk that we read a moment ago in the Megillah. V'ikar pasuk balomar sha'asurim behesped v'ta'anit. So it's a yom mishteh v'simcha. So simcha means that it's a day that is joyful. So what does that mean? It means that you don't have hespedim and you can't fast on it, and you have this meal. Right? We don't think about the corollary, but he's saying the Su'udah is just, if you will, the expansion of the idea that this is because this is a joyful day, so you can't. So you also have a meal, but you start by, and of course the biggest simcha, right? You don't say tachanun. So that is. But what happens? We'll talk about. Do you say tachanun on Sunday? V'ikar pasuk balomar sh'asurim behesped v'ta'anit u'v'yom rishon mutar b'ta'anit l'bnei ha'arevot lefachot. Right. So if there is Rachmana litzlan, a funeral on Sunday of the day after Purim, so certainly he says maybe not in Yerushalayim, maybe you could say because you're having the meal, but everywhere else you should have it, and there are achronim to this day who say you should say tachanun if you're not in Yerushalayim on Sunday. But, Jews are machmir about certain things, so minhag in the world is not to. But okay, fine. So then, but there's no isser, certainly. It's not Purim anymore. ויש לנו לאסור של זה בזה איך יעשו בני ט"ו הסעודה ביום שיכולים להתענות בו בני י"ד. How can you have a situation where just outside of Yerushalayim they're fasting because they decided to make a fast on Sunday, and in Yerushalayim they have to eat a meal, right? You can't have that kind of break. והנני מודה שטעות גדולה היא אליי לחלוק על זה מכוח השכל, כיוון שבירושלמי נאמר. So I agree with you. I understand. It's really a beautiful piece that he's saying. I know it's a Yerushalmi, and I know it's my puny logic against the Yerushalmi, and who am I to argue with the Yerushalmi? V'im kol zeh, but yeah, l'inyan maaseh omer. So I'm going to say it anyway. Shekevan, but he needs some kind of source to pin it on. Shekevan sha'Rambam zal ein ken dato b'vadai k'mevuar b'hilchot shaloka. So he says the Rambam agrees with me. How do I know the Rambam agrees with me? He says the Rambam agrees with me because Rambam doesn't talk about when you should have the Su'udah. And since he talks about pushing up the Kriyat Megillah, so he certainly should have told him also about pushing off the Su'udah, the way that we saw in the Beit Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch. Since he doesn't do that, so it must be that he thinks that you're having the meal on that day. And he says, as a result,
Which day?
On Shabbat. So, and the Rambam is the rabbi, the rabbinic authority of the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so we are going to go with the Rambam. Yesh lanu lasot ma'aseh al piv, right? And that's when you're going to do it. And he continues the last line here. Umanot ish l'reyehu, which nobody speaks about in the earlier sources. So what about mishloach manot? So he says you do it with the Su'udah. The purpose of the mishloach manot is to is a expansion of the Su'uda idea. You can, the Gemara says that you can be Mekayim Mishloach Manot by exchanging meals. If you have two people who are both poor, and they can't afford to give gifts to the other. So what you can do is I'll make my Sudat Purim and give it to you. And that's my Mishloach Manot to you. You make your Sudat Purim and you give it to me, and that's your Mishloach Manot. So I end up eating what you prepared, and you end up eating what I prepared. We've done the Suda, we've done the Mishloach Manot. So basically Mishloach Manot, and this is one of the reasons why Mishloach Manot needs to be edible items, and not not even raw foodstuffs, but food that is ready to eat when you give it, right? Because again, it's ideally supposed to be part of the Seudah. So he says if that's the case, so Mishloach Manot should also be done on Shabbat, and that's what he does, and that's what he in Yerushalayim in his tenor this is what was done.
Say Mishloach Manot on Shabbat.
Yes.
Which means you're carrying.
Right. Otherwise, you have to deal with it the way that you go to any other host. You go to your host and you figure it out. You deal with it. Now, in Yerushalayim, remember, it's within the walled city. So and they would close the gates. So then already in his time, they were carrying inside Yerushalayim. So that it's less of a problem. Okay, but you're right. In other words, he's basically saying, in a walled city, you can forget it because you can ask the same question about the Megillah itself, right? I know. But this is the Rambam. Okay, do we paskin this way? So it's a machloket the Achronim afterwards, subsequent Achronim. The consensus here in number 8 in the Mishnah, remember the Shulchan Aruch, who is not necessarily, I'm not saying it's anything personal, God forbid, but he's not necessarily the biggest fan because of the machloket between Yerushalayim and Tzfat in general, of the other Albach. So he, as we saw, the Shulchan Aruch says that the meal should be on Sunday. He's following the Yerushalmi straight down the road. The Mishnah Berurah brings down the fact that this machloket, and he points out subsequent authorities who disagree with the Ralbach, and therefore he says the halacha is on that you have the Suda on Sunday. And in the second line, here in the bold, the hu adin memela sheshiluach manot gam b'yom rishon b'Shabbat. Right? Again, nobody had spoken about mishloach manot before the Ralbach, and he says he should do it on Shabbat with the meal. But we're going to accept his rationale. He says rationale makes sense. Mishloach manot goes with Seudah. He's wrong about the date, but we go with the day of the Seudah on Ted Zion. So mishloach manot also go on Sunday. Now that's the dominant shita. The Chazon Ish, however, right? Now he was in Bnei Brak, not in Yerushalayim, but he disagrees. Here's source number 9 with this idea, and he says the following because he argues with the principle. It's very interesting. At least I found it interesting that he does this. He says the following with regard to Chal Tisha B'Av, the 15th of Adar b'Shabbat, Mishloach Manot Umatanot LeEvyonim be'erev Shabbat. Chazon Ish says that you should give your Mishloach Manot on Friday, not on Sunday. D'belav hachi nireh Mishloach Manot Umatanot LeEvyonim einam mitchalkim. The argument of the Ralbach was that Mishloach Manot is a subset of the Suda, or at least connected to the Suda. He says no. Mishloach Manot is actually a subset of Matanot LeEvyonim. Whenever you give Matanot LeEvyonim, that's when you give Mishloach Manot. So it's saying what's the purpose of why do we give Matanot LeEvyonim? I mean, you should give tzedakah all the time. Why give matanot le'evyonim on Purim? Why do you have this special din matanot le'evyonim? So people are coming to shul. Okay, but people come to shul other times of the year. Why? I've never seen. The shnuras come to shul every day. right? Okay, fine.
No, it's the same
No, the
people
pasuk says-
who gave us shir on Sunday.
Okay, huh?
Dumped the oven here. They-
Okay, so Matanot le'Evyonim is mentioned explicitly in the pasuk, right? It was because it's part of the way that holidays were celebrated at that time. It's become the takana, as is Mishloach Manot. It seems to really go very nicely with the general theme of the Kimu v'Kiblu HaYehudim, right? That we are counterbalancing the Haman argument of Am Mefuzar Mufarad Ben Ha'amim, that we are this scattered nation. And all of the mitzvot of Purim, right, are, and even perhaps to a certain extent, the mitzvah, that odd mitzvah of drinking on Purim. So all of them come to unify people. Right? That's the underlying theme of all of the mitzvot. I'll just give one. Let's just go through all of them. The mishloach manot ish l're'ehu, right? In other words, that's an odd thing to do. I mean, it's nice to give gifts to friends, but why? Because again, it's something which brings people together. The idea of specifically matanot le'evyonim, so to make sure that every person is included in the cloud. Nobody is left behind. That's the idea of matanot le'evyonim, specifically on Purim. We're celebrating, and he's going to be sitting with eating a hard piece of bread in his hovel. No, you have to make sure that everyone is celebrating, and the money that's given for matanot le'evyonim, by the way, has to go for Purim use, whereas the Evyon can decide what he's going to do with it. But it's something which explains why the money has to be given on Purim, and that and you seek out the Evyonim, and if any ani comes to you, you give him something, right? Even if you're already given matanot le'evyonim, and why it's connected to Kriyat Megillah, which is also a communal mitzvah, which we're going to get to in 2 minutes. But the idea that it's something that I've spoken about before in another context, right? The mitzvah of Purim is mitzvah lefarsem et hanes, right? To that the Kriyat Megillah of Purim is to there goes my English, is to publicize this miracle. So the Ner Chanukah, is also a mitzvah to publicize a miracle. But the venue is very different. The venue for Chanukah is the home, Ner Ishu Beito. But the venue and that's where I spoke about it in terms of why it should be at the household. But the venue for the Megillah is specifically in the public forum. And we have this idea that you want to have as many people as possible hearing the Megillah together. Because it's a unifying mitzvah. We are all in the same boat. We're coming together. So this idea is the mitzvah for the rationale for the mitzvah kriyat megillah. That's the rationale for matanot le'evyonim. It's the rationale for mishloach manot. It also happens to be the rationale for the seudah, and I would argue it's also the rationale for drinking, because the famous line de lo yada. So it doesn't say Ben doesn't know between Haman and Mordechai. You know who's Haman, you know who Mordechai is, but you don't know Arur and Baruch. On this day, when you get a little tipsy, everybody's friends, and that's okay. Yeah.
So you did such a good job of tying all this mitzvot together. Why don't you have any halachic opinions saying all these mitzvot must be performed on the same day, and if we're in Mitzvot Sunday, then everything should be in place?
Okay, so it would seem, and then we'll get to, that's a really good segue. Hold on to that, okay? I just want to finish one point. So he says that you should do it on Friday, and he is adamant about it. The majority opinion is not like his. Majority opinion follows the opinion of the Mishnah Berurah here, and so generally speaking, what people will tell you to do, just to sum up the core halachot, on Friday, Kriyat Megillah and Matanot Le'evyonim, on Shabbat, Al Hanisim and Kriyat Torah, on Sunday, the Seudah and Mishloach Manot. Right? The Machmirim, I mentioned outside by the coffee stand, the same type of chumrah that allows you to say, oh, I don't know if I ate enough, brownies to make a bracha achrona, so I'll have another brownie. So that same chumrah allows you to say, you know what, maybe the Ralbach is right. So let's have a l'chaim at the Suda of Shabbat, right? If this is a Sudat Purim, what's so terrible? Give someone a mishloach manot all 3 days, right? Maybe the Chazon Ish is right. Nothing is wrong. No one was killed, unless of course you carry on Shabbat. But that's So that's if you want to be machmir and do all of them, that's fine. But in terms of the actual, if you will, the mainstream halacha, it's that breakdown. Friday, Kriyat Megillah Matanot B'Yanim, Shabbat Al Anisim, no celebration whatsoever other than within the ritual. Right? I'll be in my yeshiva with my talmidim. I'll tell them that. So we're not going to do anything special that Shabbat. And then I'll be hanging in the gallows. And then Sunday is the Seudah. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay. In the few minutes that I've left, okay, I don't think I'm going to reach the third point, which is the third section, which doesn't apply to people who are in Yerushalayim. It does apply to people in Yerushalayim when Purim falls on Thursday. Right? Can you make the Sudat Purim for the people who are outside of Yerushalayim? Can you make Sudat Purim towards the end of Friday and let it carry into Shabbat? So I'm not going to have time to discuss that, but I printed out the guidelines that I took from Rav Rimon's book. There was some room for discussion on some of the finer points, but really just if anyone is going to be outside of Yerushalayim on Friday, families want to do that, so that's the guideline. Though generally speaking, the best time to do the Seudah is before in the morning, and not in the afternoon on Erev Shabbat. Having said that, now let's just talk a little bit more in depth and getting to. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Adina.
I'm sorry?
Adina.
So Dina's question, like, why don't we just put them all together? Okay. So the answer now becomes a question of really, well, how do I view what I'm doing on Friday? In other words, you're going to read the Megillah. We're all going to read the Megillah on Friday. Right? So, if someone reads the Megillah outside of Yerushalayim, does that have the same halachic weight as someone who's reading Megillah in Yerushalayim? Right? Because they're Yerushalmi. In other words, it's if you will, the nitche, the fact that it's been moved over, is that still the same the same halachic heft?
Not nitche.
What?
It's makdim.
Makdim, right? Correct.
Well,
So
the question should be: is it one in Yerushalayim having the same
correct?
weight?
Right. No, okay, fine. I accept all of those he'arot. The point, objections sustained. So now so having said that, let's take a look quickly at some of these sources. So the Gemara had said that we're going to read it. Going to read it on Friday. Now, in another discussion in the Gemara and Daf Hey, this is source number 10. The Gemara says the following: Amar Rav, Megillah bizmana korina ta'afilu biyachid. If you are reading the Megillah in its proper time, then you read it on, even an individual reads it. Shelo bizmana, but outside of its proper time, asara. So then you need ba'asara, you need a minyan to read the Megillah. Rav Asi Amar, ben bizmana, ben shelo bizmana, ba'asara. Rav Asi says, whatever you read the Megillah, whether it's the day that you're supposed to read it or another time, so you need a minyan to read it. Okay, now this really touches upon what Adina asked. Because basically what this is saying is that you have this concept that for whatever the reason, right, you may have to read the Megillah not on the date of Purim.
At least the market days.
Right. So the market days for the villagers. Perhaps and that's what we'll talk about right now. Perhaps this year for everyone in Yerushalayim. Okay, it's not the proper time, but you have to do it. Why? Because of what Rabbah said. Why? Because of what Rabbi Yosef said. Whatever the reason, we don't read it in the proper time. Is this the same or not? Now, what is that implying? The underlying idea, this is just what I want to, is that even though we have a theme, and the theme is a very nice theme, okay? So there are going to be, if you will, technical legal reasons that are not going to allow us to do everything together. And then the question is, well, okay, so how do you deal with each halachic facet, and when do you assign it? Right? So you can look at, Purim Meshulash. It depends. Like, if you are the, if you're the Grinch that, stole Purim. So then you look at the 3 days as being, bah humbug. It's like, can you think of more torture than that, right? 3 days of Megillah. I will tell you, getting back to what I said before, spend 3 days with yeshiva guys. Yeah, it can be torturous. So that is, but okay, so that's what you have to suffer with. But you can look at it as an opportunity too, and you can say, okay, if this is the theme of unifying, so okay, we have 3 days of unifying people, right, in different ways and different aspects. But the rationale, I think, for the mitzvot is that, and the fact that we have to spread it out is because of technical reasons, right? The technical reason of the Megillah, or be it the technical reason of the Yerushalmi, feeling that by incorporating the Sudat Purim into Shabbat, you're shortchanging both. Right? I didn't quite say it this way before. You are not, you're not giving Shabbat its full due, right? Because after all, the mitzvah of Simcha is, according to the Yerushalmi, D'oraita from God on Shabbat, and right, people will think of it much more as the Purim Suda. Let's be honest. We're going to say that, and at the same time, it's not giving Purim its full due, because you're saying, well, we're not really doing something special for Purim as much as because it happens to fall on Shabbat. And so there's a technical reason to push it off to Sunday. Right? So then, what do you do on? So we've done it. So getting back to this question, overtime has begun. So now what is this idea of the tenth? So it's not clear. I'm going to skip number 11 right now because of the time. I apologize. It's not clear who are we talking about? Which people are we talking about? So Rashi says, what is Shelo Bizmana? Right? It refers to the people who are in the villages. That they are the ones who have to read it. Now they're reading it on Thursday. So that's clearly not the proper time. So then there's a machloket, and within the question, this is what the source that I'm skipping talks about, how far do we take that? Does that mean you don't have a minyan, you don't read it at all? Mm-hmm. Or does it mean that it's a lechatchila, that you should be doing it? In other words, if you say that you read it biyachid, so then you don't have to, you can read it by yourself, or you can go to the minyan if you want. But if you say it has to be basara, so it doesn't mean that if you don't have basara, you don't read it. What it means is that you should be reading it basara. Right? So there are different ways of understanding, and a lot of different moving parts in this particular sugya. But the question is, what's Shelo Bizmana? That's what I want to focus on. So Rashi says it means the people in the villages. The Ran, the source number 13, says that doesn't make any sense, because when the Gemara was arguing about it, they had already dispensed with this minhag. In other words, they didn't read it in the villages on a different time. And yet they're arguing about Bizmana, the right time, Shelo Bizmana, the law, not the right time. So it must mean that it's referring to Yerushalmim on Fridays of a Purim Meshulash. So according to the Ran, what it's saying is that the reading of someone on Yud Daled in a place where he should be reading normally on the 15th, so that reading is somehow diminished and should only be done, ideally at least as lechatchila and perhaps even b'di'eved, only with a minyan. Okay, it's not quite the same reading as such. The Rambam, on the other hand, in number 14, when he says it, he says the following: "V'chol," the last line, "Chol elu shemakdimim v'korin kodem arba asar." If anyone who reads it before the 14th, ein korin otava pachot mi'asara, then it should not be read with less than 10 people. Right? The Rambam seems to say that the less than 10 means you don't read it at all, and number 2 is that it's only referring to the people who don't read it on the 14th, meaning village people. But when it comes to the anyone reading it as this year on Friday the 14th, so then that's not included. That's the Zman. Okay. Now this question becomes has all sorts of different nafkaminot. Okay. What happens? Simplest case. Let's say you don't have a minyan on Yerushalayim, or you're reading for people who weren't able to make it to shul, right? Or you have a little bit more complicated. I don't want to get into to open up too much of a Pandora's box, but the question is asked also with regard to women's readings on Purim, where there is a question of is that a minyan or is that not a minyan? So, should you be reading it on for those people? Can you make a bracha on that reading, etc.? So here, the Mishnah Brura number he actually says it twice, and that's why I brought it here in number 16, number 17. So he's quite adamant about it. He says, "Uvizeh od chamir yoter di'i leka asara lo yivarchu hamukafin aleha." If you don't have a minyan for reading the Megillah on Friday, then you don't make a bracha. That's the psak of the Mishnah Brura. The Chazon Ish won't have any of it. But his question is with regard to women's reading, but here he's not referring to women's readings, but he's referring to readings that are designed for women, after at a later time of the morning or later time of the evening, when there are people taking care of the kids at home. So that reading, can you do it and make a bracha? So he says quite strongly, and this is here, interestingly enough, this is the shita which is accepted in most locales, meaning most poskim. There's only really one locale in Yerushalayim, maybe in Hebron. And so here and he goes down the list. I'm not going to go through it point by point, because of the time, but basically he brings at least 4 reasons, 4 sveikot, 4 hurdles that you have to get over in order to say you shouldn't make a bracha. And if any of those hurdles are taken away, or you fall on any of those hurdles, then you make the bracha. So one of them is it the right time or is it not the right time? Another question is, well, even if it's the wrong time, is it usher to make a bracha or not? That's a machloket in of itself. And another issue is with regard to the women who are there. According to many opinions, the women form a minyan in themselves. Well, it's going through all of the different ideas. He basically says that you should make a bracha and you should read it. The question, though, as a result, which unfortunately I have 1 minute till double overtime is over. So the question which really goes to the heart of it is all sorts of other nafkamina. Can a person on, let's say, a Yerushalmi, get into a car, drive to an army base off, well outside of Yerushalayim, and read the Megillah for the Chayalim there? Is his mitzvah the same as their mitzvah? Because after all, it's not a nidcha, but a mukdam. For him, it's lo bizmana, perhaps, or not. Another question that comes: somebody becomes bar mitzvah on Shushan Purim, right? So, should he read the Megillah? Because after all, he didn't really hear the Megillah now, and now it's the actual time for the Megillah. Or do we say that no, the fact that we moved it to Friday, it has become the time this year for Yerushalmi? This is the rationale. All sorts of, these kind of halachic questions, which, Be'ezrat Hashem, I'll make a note, 20 years from now, we have a date, and we'll talk about them. Okay.
I think it was 1994, it was the last